Yes, my friends. So we got Nets podcast this time, coming to you for the second time on the new feed from a relaxed atmosphere. It is hotter than hell on a Saturday, but I want to be outside, iced coffee in hand, and because we have some news around the Brooklyn Nets roster decisions this offseason. Maybe one surprising, you could say, on this list. The other three, actually, no, two surprising, you could say. And then two that you would certainly think were going to be around this upcoming season, at least from my perspective. But let's break down why there's value in all of them. Per Brian Lewis of the New York Post, he announced earlier today, around 3 o'clock over on X, the Nets have exercised team options for the 25-26 season on Keon Johnson, Tyrese Martin, Drew Timme, and Jalen Wilson. Now, let's just talk with that last name first. Jalen Wilson, he's a draft pick, even though he's a second rounder. Obviously, organizationally, you believed in him. Not surprising that you're going to pick up his option, which amounted to, I want to make sure I get this number right, $2.2 million for the upcoming season. No surprise there. Obviously, what is surprising for him is that the numbers have not been where you've wanted them to be. We do remember, though, if you go back to this past season with Jalen Wilson. So, obviously, you want him to be a guy 6'6", 220. He's going to play out there on the wing. You need him to be a knockdown shooter from the outside. It has not been that necessarily. Over his first two seasons, 43 games his rookie year, 3 starts, knocked down 42.5 from the field, only 32.4 from beyond the arc, although it was on low volume, under 2 attempts per game, only averaging 15 minutes. Big jump up there in year number 2. He has 79 games, 22 starts, almost 26 minutes of action. Field goal percentage drops under 40%. 3-point shooting takes a mild jump in the right direction up to 33.7. Did see massive volume increase, obviously, with increased minutes, 4.5 attempts per game. What we like about it, if we want to talk about it, is that over the back end of this season, as things were winding down, he started to come back on with that 3-point shot. In the last 4 games there, we talk about the end of the season, he was knocking down 5 of 8, 4 of 8, 6 of 10, right? That's a good sign. 51% over the closeout of that season. Whereas as we go back towards the beginning of the year, it just was not the same opportunities that we were hoping for, right? Shot just 33% in October, up to 38 in November, down to 29 in December. Oh, sorry, that's going into January. Oh, no, December's right. Sorry. Gotta get these things on track here. 25% in January, right? So month over month, you're just not loving it. But then in February, 30%. Then in March, 36%. And then you get into that end of the season there as you head into April and you start to see a movement in the right direction. We don't know, right? Do we think that Jalen Wilson is long for an expanded role with this team? No. But with these 5 rookies coming in, I think you can start to think about him in the role that we identified for him when he was drafted. Hey, if you come in, you show that you can continue to develop that 3-point shot and knock it down consistently, especially off of catch and shoots, right? Find open spaces on the floor. You can be a guy that comes off the bench and helps supplement the scoring from the outside, especially when you have all these on-ball creators, facilitators that the Nets brought in here this year in the draft. So that's Jalen Wilson, no surprise there. When we talk about the other 3 players here, Tyrese Martin, Keon Johnson, and then obviously also Drew Timme. Drew Timme, I'm going to go to him here next because it's not a surprise to me at all that the Nets elected to pick up what amounted to a $1.95 million option on the season. Why? Because even though Danny Wolf and Drew Timme are not the same player, they're in the same vein. Drew Timme is not the most athletic player in the world. But what he's capable of is a little bit of everything, right? And we asked this question at the end of last season over on the other network, Locked On, when we were closing things out there. What does it mean over a 9-game sample size for Drew Timme, who's 24 years old, 6'10", 235, lit it up at the G League level, obviously, and earned that opportunity? Well, over the course of those 9 games, he sat down and gave you 44% from the field. Yes, just 26% from beyond the arc. Got to the line a handful of times, 16 total over those 9 games. Only knocked down 62%, right? Had a couple of rebounds. 2.2 assists per game, 7 rebounds per game to go along with a half a steal. Yeah, personal fouls, turnovers, right? 12 points. But this, I think, with better expectations for Danny Wolf, especially with perimeter shooting, especially with on-ball capabilities on the dribble and also setting the table. But I think like Drew Timme kind of represents what the Brooklyn Nets want more of out of that 5, flexing down to the 4 at times. Little more ball handling, little more kind of court vision and awareness, right? And the ability to say, if I'm not creating for myself, I still understand fundamentally how I create opportunities for others. I think Drew Timme represents what we heard a lot from Sean Marks in the post-draft comments. This is a guy that we see as high IQ, right? Understanding of the game. I think that's why Drew Timme lit up the G League. I think that's why he got the opportunity at the end of last year. And I think that's why he's going to be on the bench to start this season this year. And we'll find out whether or not you start to see that balance in terms of rotations of Drew Timme coming in and trying to duplicate a little bit of that. The Nets were trying to do this with Ben Simmons and Trendon Watford, right? And on ball, not really going to be, as we have a blast of a car go by here in the background. I mean, in the case of Ben Simmons, not going to be able to even think about shooting a shot. We know the hopes for Trendon Watford in a lot of ways. But just that duplication of skill sets, so the same familiarity and rhythm from rotation to rotation. The Nets have lacked that, right? So the other thing that I think that I'm curious about with this is there's been that conversation. What's going to go on with Day'Ron Sharpe? There's a chance they bring him back. There's a chance somebody else makes him an offer sheet. The problem with Day'Ron Sharpe, for different reasons, some similar, is the same problem with Nicholas Claxton. There's some things he does well, and then there's some things that he doesn't do at all, right? We talked about this last year too. Do I like Day'Ron Sharpe? Yes. Do I think he took a nice step forward this past season in some facets of his game? Certainly. But the number one thing that we point to every single time that we talk about Day'Ron Sharpe is the fouls. Because when you go back and look at it, in this past season, he played in 50 games, he only had 2 starts, he averaged 18 minutes, and he committed over 2 fouls. It's just, that doesn't mean that he can't be that guy, right? I'm going to play 18, 20 minutes, and I'm going to commit 2 to 3 fouls, and you're never going to be able to play me 30, because I'll probably end up taking some of those fouls, especially on the defensive end. That's because he doesn't have some of the lateral quickness. He can't rotate over consistently, right? There's just something inside of that game that's a hair off. Now, he's another guy that you can't really judge anymore for his three-point percentage, because the Nets brought in a lot of guys that don't have a good three-point percentage. But he hasn't seen that climb up, right? He took more. He almost averaged a three-point attempt per game this past year. Still knocked it down at under 30%, though, under 25%, if we're being 100% accurate. And when you increased that volume this year, the percentage went down. From a game log standpoint, again, we talk about like the last time that we saw him at the end of March. Again, the three-point attempts were certainly there. He did not knock down any of them, 20% to close out the year. So it's not like, again, we saw an increase in production month over month, or like Jalen Wilson, hey, maybe it hasn't always been perfect, but we're starting to see the trend in the right direction. Retaining Drew Timme to me could be an indication of a shift of how the Nets and how Jordi Fernandez wants to construct this roster. I could very easily see this being that some other team makes an offer sheet for Day'Ron Sharpe. The Nets just say, that, even though they have the cap space, we don't need to. They can go to free agency, think about someone else that maybe makes more sense for what they want to create with this roster going forward, and they say goodbye to Day'Ron. Because I was talking about this, I think I mentioned at the end of the draft coverage, specifically around Danny Wolf and how he and Nicholas Claxton can play on the court together because they can complement one another. Claxton can help him on the defensive end, and Danny Wolf can maybe create some easier open transition opportunities for Nicholas Claxton, something that they were lacking a year ago because you don't have enough ball handlers, enough guys with their heads up looking across the court. But that doesn't help with Day'Ron Sharpe. Drew Timme can help with that. It's not going to be perfect, and we're not going to worry as much about the defensive end as we are about the offensive end this upcoming season with all these guys and what we want to see develop, but I can see how that fits. So now all of a sudden, if you look at the depth chart and we're talking about, as we said there, Keon Johnson gets retained, put Demon in the mix there, put Traore in the mix there, you're going to put newly drafted Drake Powell, although I think he plays up to the 3 positionally, quote-unquote, a lot of times here in this because, again, same type of measurables that we talk about with a Jalen Wilson. More defensive upside for Drake Powell, more upside overall for Drake Powell, age, development, projection, right? But now when you go up to that center position in the 4-5, really, we think about Nicholas Claxton, you put Danny Wolf in that mix, you keep Drew Timme in that mix there, and then I think the next interesting one is going to be about Zaire Williams. My preference is, we'll see what happens, my preference is that they bring back Zaire Williams because he can play at the 4, the defensive value is there. 3-point shooting, no, again, never expanded into that upper echelon that we hoped for consistently a year ago. But I will note on him, as we talk about stats from the season ago, and building a nice front court based on the fact that you invested heavily, although with some size, in backcourt, right? You invested in the guard position way more than anywhere else. If we go back and we think about Zaire Williams, remember, I want to make sure I get these numbers right. We go back and look at that game log. This is a guy that closed out the season, knocked down almost 34% in March from beyond the arc, knocked down 37% in February from beyond the arc, 37% in January. So even though it dipped off a little bit at the back end, he skyrocketed after a November where he was sub 20% on 3 attempts from beyond the arc. So he found that rhythm again as the season progressed on. And by the end of this year, for Zaire Williams, you were talking about something that we wanted to see. Remember, Memphis, 3 seasons before coming over to Brooklyn, 31%, 26%, 30%. Career high, 34% from beyond the arc with Brooklyn, and on a career high volume, almost 5 attempts per game. You combine that with the fact that the 3 percentage is strong for him, something that other players in this front court lack right now, in Danny Wolf, in Drew Timme, in Nicholas Claxton. Zaire Williams being back, probably a whole other episode about him, but I'm just noting this right now because it's coming up in my mind. That's going to be something that we discuss in terms of decisions that the Nets are going to make. Okay. Keon Johnson retained defensive value, grittiness, toughness. He maybe earned it, right? We'll see what comes of him there in the backcourt and how that rotation plays out. Keeping a guy like Drew Timme around makes all the sense in the world. You developed him. You took a chance on a guy like Gonzaga coming in a little bit older. He dominated at that level. He earned the right to come up to the NBA level and now get a chance to start with the team as well. Take a brief time out here to let the bells play. Bells are done, back for the fun. So now the Nets have retained 2 players on those options. And by the way, these are incredibly cheap, so it's also another value because in the big picture, reminder, if you end up thinking about acquiring somebody, if you're going to eat a contract and those teams are trying to dump a salary your way and then also maybe get back some form of value, you can go ahead and point across some of these guys and say, hey, look, you can have this player for the rest of the year at $2 million. You're not tied into any money longer term. You're not necessarily going to lose any value if you play or don't play him, but it's an opportunity. And some of these teams, playoff teams, may look at a couple of these guys and say, yeah, we'll take a shot on it. Especially, as I note, get back into that conversation, Zaire Williams won't be a $2 million contract, but it's certainly an opportunity for the Nets to have a player that I think other teams are going to value going forward. All right, the Nets then also brought back, as I mentioned, Jalen Wilson. We're not going to focus too heavily on him. That's actually 3 out of 4 now. And the fourth one ended up being one that I waited almost to have this conversation. $2.2 million for Tyrese Martin. And it's funny because this to me, like Drew Timme, although on a bigger sample size, is one of those things that it's kind of easy to overlook him last year. It's easy to overlook Drew Timme or any of these players because you're talking about long-term development. What are the expectations? What are we going to see next? You know, where's the new generation and the new core? That being said, he is 26 years old. He is incredibly cheap. And let's just be realistic here. He played in Atlanta only 16 games the year prior. Did not sniff enough of a sample size, right? Only shot 39% from the floor. Only shot 14% from beyond the arc. Comes over to Brooklyn, and because it was Brooklyn, because they were tanking, maybe unsuccessfully by many fan standards, 60 games, 11 starts, 22 minutes. Only shot 40% from the field, but shot 35% from beyond the arc. Knocked down, only averaging 1 per game, almost 80%, just over 79%, I should say, from the free throw line, and then gave you almost 4 rebounds per game, a couple of assists, and, most importantly, in 22-minute clip, only had just over 1 personal foul per game, 1.3 personal fouls, 1.2 turnovers. To me, this is another player that makes sense to retain, not only because he gives you value, and I think you can talk about high IQ, understanding the game, playing within himself. Those things I actually think do matter a lot. But at 26 years old, this guy represents, I think for sure, a value retention for the Brooklyn Nets to give themselves an opportunity potentially to flip him in the course of the season. His age doesn't fit the timeline they want. You do want to have some veterans here. And oh, by the way, if we're thinking about maybe moving Keon Johnson, we talked about it for so many years now, maybe they do. So in that case, like Zaire Williams, you saw the uptick in three-point shooting. Keeping a guy like Tyrese Martin, who has some size, certainly, and then can also at least showcase capable of taking open looks, knocking down some triples, right? That matters. And, it's funny, the very end of his season, the last few games, tailed off massively from beyond the arc, although only across 16 three-point attempts. But he shot over 40%. He was 41% in the month of March, and that's not like on a blip on some random. He had closing things out in games against Dallas, Washington, the Clippers, against Dallas, against the Pacers. He had those games knocking down 50%, 40%. He went over that 5-game stretch at the end of March, quick math, maybe even a little bit slow by some expectations, 10, 16, 20, 26 three-point attempts. He knocked down a combined 3, 6, 9, whoop, 11, 13, right? So the percentages tell you that he can do it consistently. He also, over that month, had a 5 of 8 performance, a 3 of 7. He had another 4 of 8 against the LA Lakers at one point, 3 of 6 against the Golden State Warriors, 2 of 5 against the Detroit Pistons. Now, in February, yeah, he was sub 30 from beyond the arc, right? In January, he was just over 31%. So there was a heavy lift, and the Phoenix game from early in the season where he knocked down 8 of 10. And like you say, 8 of 10. It does mean something when over the course of the season you ultimately took 289 three-point attempts, and the 10 doesn't matter. It's that last month of the season. That volume is what matters. And I just want to go back here real quick to that game log, because if we think about the fact that he took 10, so what he took another 16 at the end of the year there, and over that month he averaged 5 per game in the month of March across 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 games. So that's what, 50, 30, that's 80, over 80 three-point attempts, and then combine it with those last few games, almost 100. So a third of his attempts came in the last basically month of the season, and in that last month of the season, he was close to a 40% shooter from deep, right? You include the bad run to close out those last few games. That matters. It matters significantly. So keeping him around is a smart play here for the Brooklyn Nets. Again, out of these 4 players, I don't think Drew Timme would offer any value despite how he might look over the course of the season. I think that that's positional and schematic redundancy when you think about Danny Wolf coming in now. So I like that. Jalen Wilson, same thing. I don't think we're going to be talking about how another team looks at him. Now, if the three-point shot comes around in a big way, the Nets probably won't hesitate to flip him at the deadline as a second-round pick on an expiring contract. If he's knocking down, 36, 37% from beyond the arc, another team just needs a little bump in their three-point shooting. But a guy like Tyrese Martin, I think, offers that for sure. Keon Johnson, again, same thing. I don't think other teams are really going to be sniffing around here for him. So maybe it's Tyrese Martin that's going to represent the most flippability here at his age for the Brooklyn Nets and at what he showcased this past season. To a lesser extent, Jalen Wilson. So that's something, man. It's certainly a conversation to have here for the Brooklyn Nets. Good Lord. I want you guys to know. If you're listening on the feed, thank you. If you are watching on YouTube, I don't know what version of this is, how I've put this thing together, but it's hot. I got a nice coffee. I'm doing my best. Now, the other thing I want to mention here then is, what do we think about? We'll talk about this in more in depth, but just before we go, a reminder here that now when you look at this roster and the players that they are retaining going into this season and into summer camp here, Summer League takes place July 10th to the 20th. We're going to get a sample size immediately of all these rookies and all these guys. It's going to be phenomenal. I may or may not be out there. I'm not 100% sure. I'm trying to get there. We'll see if the credentials come through. I would love to be out there watching all these young players. But that being the case, the last reminder that I'm going to give you here about the Brooklyn Nets is when we think about the rotation. So remember, because we sat here and said, well, you invested so heavily in Igor Demin and Nolan Traore, Ben Saroff. There's some conversation. I mentioned this the other day. Some conversation. He may stay over in Europe for a year. May not come over immediately. Draft rights. We're going to see. We're going to see what happens with that. That still is going to be a judgment in terms of what they did in the draft, but it just does change how you think about the way that the rotation breaks down. So our backcourt right now is going to be Igor Demin and Cam Thomas with veteran Terrence Mann back there and Nolan Traore and now Keon Johnson returning. Those 5 players. When we move into the 3-4 position here, Tyrese Martin at 6'6", 215. And, positionless, you can play him as the 2, depending on what your combinations are. But Tyrese Martin gets retained. Drake Powell gets retained. Now we want to talk about Cam Johnson being there, at least for right now, and then Jalen Wilson. Those are your 4 guys operating out of that 3. And if you do it right, and you have Noah Clowney, and you're still going to maybe bring back Zaire Williams, and now you put Danny Wolf into that mix, and now you put Drew Timme into that mix, and you have Nicholas Claxton. Even without Day'Ron Sharpe, that's 5 players across those 2 positions in your front court that you have some flexibility that you can work with. If you end up bringing back Day'Ron Sharpe, then he folds in, and you just start to be able to push some guys down a little bit and think about combinations. Can Danny Wolf be playing at the 5 with Noah Clowney at the 4 and then Cam Johnson down at the 3 while he's on this team? Of course he can. The beautiful version of it might be Danny Wolf at the 5, Noah Clowney at the 4, Drake Powell at the 3. Let's put Igor Demin at the, well, not the 2, but you know what I mean, Cam Thomas at the 2, Igor Demin at the 1, excuse me. But you know what I mean from a size standpoint, right? So that's the young all these young players. Noah Clowney, the guy that you're excited about, hyped about, saw the volume that he was shooting there. And then at certain times, you can go even bigger with this rotation. You can do Nicholas Claxton and Drew Timme and Noah Clowney on the floor if you turn around and you have a Nolan Traore and Igor Demon out there maybe for stretches, right? Guys that are going to be ball in hand looking to distribute out there. Nicholas Claxton doesn't have a great shooting touch or any shooting touch, but Drew Timme does. So you can still figure out different combinations. I know we're going to go a layer deeper into all that, but I think you can see it. At least right now, you can start to see that kind of shape of where this team is going to be going. From that standpoint, we now have Igor Demon, Nolan Traore, Trey Johnson, Cam Thomas, Terrence Mann, Tyrese Martin. We're going to keep Drake Powell in there, Noah Clowney, Jalen Wilson, Cam Johnson as of right now, Danny Wolf, Drew Timme, Nicholas Claxton. That's 13. If you go ahead and you also bring back Day'Ron Sharpe, and that'll put in the mix there, and then technically Sarath, that gets you to 15. We know we have two-way contracts, all that stuff. The roster's shaping up. And I'll say this again. A couple of things I want to get to before we close out. One is that the Nets, we talked about this, and the fan base has been so frustrated with the idea of why didn't you tank the way you should have a year ago? This is the version of it. I said it at the end of last episode, coming out of the draft. Here's the new young core. Now go watch them grow. That's what they're selling. And that's what these decisions represent. We're bringing back guys we have familiarity with, we believe have a skill set for us, and that aren't going to stand in the way of any of these young players. And some of these guys are young as well, right? 24 years old, Drew Timme, Keon Johnson, just 23 years old still. I get it, 24 for Jalen Wilson. But are any four of those guys, including Tyrese Martin, going to prevent any of those rookies from getting on the court? Not a chance, right? So that's the move in the right direction. You can like these guys. You can talk about how they're going to fit, how they can supplement, but they're not going to stop any of the rookies that the Brooklyn Nets want to develop and have out there on the floor from getting playing time. That's different than in years past when you feel like you're a veteran-laden team and there's some expectation or responsibility to play those guys. Yes, there's still Terrence Mann. Yes, right now there's still Cam Johnson, but few and far between, right? They've gotten further and further away from the era of when it was after the Kevin Durant trade, where we still have Mikal Bridges. You have these guys, and we talked about young players then, but it was harder to talk about those young players and say they deserve X, they deserve Y, whatever it was going to be, because you're still a team that wants to make the playoffs, and you have these guys making money. DFS is there. He's a veteran. He has experience, right? When they draft Noah Clowney, I say, I just play Noah Clowney. Let him develop. Let him get those live game reps. But instead, you need to serve two agendas. Veterans, trying to make the playoffs, and then also develop your young guys. Now you're just developing your young guys, so that's a great thing. Other thing I want to mention before we go is how incredibly grateful I am for how many people went and checked out that draft episode. The downloads were phenomenal. Nothing to do with YouTube. This one will be there. Only went through the Substack feed. It's available on Apple right now. I'm sorting out some Spotify details in the background. It's not on Amazon yet. It's not on everything. I love it. I mean, I cannot tell you how completely shocked I was by how many people have started to support the Substack feed and especially went and supported the podcast feed. It means the world to me. It means that, as I said, in exiting Locked On, it was about time management and other things that I have going on professionally and personally. But this is the way that I can stay in touch and keep tapped into this stuff. And if you guys are going to support it the way that I saw coming out of the draft, I just cannot wait to continue to be involved in this, to be connected with you guys, and to have these conversations about the Brooklyn Nets. So thank you, beyond thank you, for supporting my continued efforts now with We Got Nets. That being the case, we will go back in and talk about rotations next. Again, I'll finalize what the Summer League maybe is going to look like for me, and then we'll go from there in terms of getting some live reps from some of these young players, obviously. But next is, where do we think current players on this roster benefit the most? Cam Thomas and his contract situation, what is that going to look like for the Brooklyn Nets, and what does it mean for Cam Thomas in the upcoming season? We'll get into those discussions next, and again, at least for right now, we're going to keep it classic by saying I miss my friend Doug. And I can't wait until we're all back again, talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball right here on We Got Nets.